Well, welcome to week 3 of the MOOC course on video games and learning. We still have a really active group here. Out of 37,000 people who are enrolled, we have about 9,000 who are actively participating in content still at week 3, so we're super excited. Last week we talked about game design for impact. This week we're going to shift gears some and talk about game culture and how game culture functions as a vehicle for learning.
We'll give one more plug to the forums if you haven't been in there. There's a lot of activity going on, and interestingly it does seem to mirror the kind of pyramid structure you find in other online social affinity spaces where you've got a subset participating but a whole lot of people lurking and being in the course in other ways.
Yeah, and so it's very timely to make that call out to be on the forums, given that we're going to talk about what happens on forums around content that enables people to learn. So we'll watch 2 videos on games as a third place and why that's important for American youth culture, and then we'll transition to mechanisms for learning, so we'll talk in depth about apprenticeship, and then we'll see one of Jim G's principles one more time, working on identity. And then we're going to have you do an activity this week that I'm hoping will work out really well. We're going to have you draw out your network of players and games so we can take a look at what is your gameplay social network like, and we'll run some analytics on the data that we get in from that.
Speaking of analytics?
Speaking of analytics, so we have our first wave of preliminary results back from last week's activity. So if you recall, we had everyone take 15 games and categorize them using their own categories for understanding games, and we asked you not to use genre. Not because genre is a bad category to use, but because we wanted to get into more novel, sort of deeper structure and more surface structure categories that folks might play into. So right now you're looking at the results from just the first 130 or so of players' data that we've analyzed. And you're seeing a 2x2 matrix of the top columns, novice and expert. If you look down those 2 columns, they add up to show you that we've got about 30 novices in this early data poll and about 83 experts in the early data poll. And on this side, you'll see across the rows, surface versus deep. So of the data set we've done so far, about 77 players used what we called surface categories in understanding the games. And about 36 players use what we consider deep structure categories. Now we did throw out about 8 folks who use genres. Shame on you, didn't follow directions. So let's talk about the data. Yeah, it's kind of hard to get away from genre as sort of the categories we think in, because that's how we talk about games. But here what we wanted to do was modeled after Mickey Chi's work. In her original work, she was looking at how expert and novice learners and teachers in physics, in the domain of physics, actually think through problems. And what she found was that novice physics students categorize physics problems based on surface features. Things like, does it contain a pulley? Is there an inclined plane? Whereas expert physics professors categorize those same problems based on deep structural features. For example, in this case, what kind of, like for example, did it use the same equation for force in order to solve it? So we've had a long-standing kind of hypothesis here that, in fact, part of the trouble with games, what makes it difficult in the public sort of understanding and discourse, is that if you're not a game player, all you see is probably surface features. So you see things like color palettes and whether or not it contains guns. Versus a game player who, when they come to a game, they actually are seeing much more deep sort of structural features. So what did we find out? Well, if you look at this 2x2 matrix, it turns out that our hypothesis is, in fact, so far bearing out really well. So 3 of these 4 cells are significant. The only non-significant cell is experts using surface features. So let me walk through what that means. So the novices are more likely to use surface features than random. So it is significant that novices are using surface features. It's significant that novices are not using deep structural features, and it's significant that experts are using deep structural features. So what we've got so far is, in fact, bearing out our analysis that that novices do indeed tend to use surface versus deep features when thinking about games, which makes sense, right? If you don't know the medium very well, you're going to be far more inclined to see what's obvious on the screen or on a screenshot or an image than you are to think about sort of the mechanics of the game.
So that's about it. I think as we kick off for this week, one thing to keep in mind is that this is a week where we really want to talk about game culture, and we'll be making a lot of connections to some of the learning theories that we think of sociocultural or situated learning theory that really emphasize how it is that social interaction and the cultural milieu both color interaction and shape learning, and then become a core part of what constitutes learning and meaning making. And games are a really interesting place to look for this, and hopefully you'll get a sense of that from the readings and presentations.
So good luck this week. We'll see you next week.